Hi, my name is Yiwei Wang. I'm one of the law librarians at UC Berkeley. This video covers some tips and resources from the law library for researching judicial clerkships. We're looking principally at these three questions as starting points. You may be at the point where you're just starting to think about clerking and wondering, what can you do to start learning about what clerkships are, what you can do and accomplish in a clerkship, and where to look for clerkships, what kinds of courts, and what kind of information is available about those courts. You might be a little further along in your considerations. You might be interested, for example, in a particular geographical location where you would like to start out in a clerking career, or you might have an interest in a particular specialty area of law and are wondering what jurisdictions see a lot of work in those topic areas. Or finally, you may have already actually identified a judge or perhaps a handful of judges that you are definitely interested in applying to and want to know how to find out more information about those particular judges. So we're providing here a little roadmap for this video that has these time marks to get you to the point in the video where each of those three questions above are addressed. Before you start up any of those bits of the video, I want to encourage you to really just, make sure you take as much or as little as makes sense for where you are in your thought process about applying for clerkships. And as you view, the many resources and tips that we offer here, remember that you don't have to do everything that's suggested here to succeed in your clerkship search. By way of illustration of that last point, I can tell you a little bit about my own background. I've been a law librarian at UC Berkeley for about 15 years, but before that, I was a litigator. I worked first at a large global law firm at the San Francisco office of that firm, and then after that, I was at a mid-sized Bay Area firm. But before being in practice, I also clerked at the Southern District of New York. And to be frank, how I got to that clerkship, I didn't do a lot of research about it. When I was in law school as a second year, I was working at Harvard Law Review, and a lot of my peers were starting to talk about clerkships. And coming from a family where there weren't a lot of lawyers in my background, I didn't really know anything about the legal field. What they were talking about didn't really seem to kind of connect with what my plans were. A lot of my peers were talking about appellate court clerkships and lining themselves up potentially to apply for Supreme Court clerkships at a later point. And, even the 3L editors, the third-year editors that I was hanging out with at Harvard Law Review, many of them had already secured their clerkships for their first year out of law school and were now, talking about further clerkships, including Supreme Court clerkship applications. And none of it really sort of resonated with me until one of the third years kind of pulled me aside and was like, yeah, I understand you're interested in becoming a litigator, and, I'm in the same boat, and that's why I chose to apply only to federal district courts so that I can get some experience at the trial court level, and that, that was kind of where the penny dropped finally for me, that clerkships, that's a thing for somebody sort of with those kinds of, that kind of orientation and those goals in mind. So, I wound up just kind of thinking about where I wanted to be. I knew that when I went into practice, I was interested in being in Northern California, And I had some personal reasons for being interested in New York City. So I wound up actually just narrowing down to the federal districts around New York City, and applied to judges both in the Eastern District and the Southern District of New York. I had a wonderful time clerking. It was a great experience. I learned a lot, and it gave me a level of confidence when I became a litigator to go into hearings or even just pretrial, management conferences with a level of confidence about sort of the courtroom atmosphere, what to expect, and who the personalities were. So by way of illustration, that's just for me personally. There wasn't a lot of research that went into it at the time. I mean, that was a long time ago. There was sort of less information that was readily available online, and so you guys are lucky because if you're so inclined to do more research and to have a more sort of thoughtful and engaged process with looking for a clerkship, we have a lot of options for doing research from the comfort of your own home. And I hope you enjoy this video as an introduction and some tips for some of the places that you can look if you'd like to do that. So I'm going to do a lot of my navigating in this video from the Law Library's homepage. Remember that anytime you're in the law school domain, you'll find this universal navigation ribbon up at the top that has news, events, Law Library, and that link will always bring you to the Law Library's homepage, where you'll find kind of a research dashboard. And this is just a good way to navigate to a lot of the library's resources that you might use in your clerkship search process. Primarily, there's a databases list that has some of the resources that I'm going to be talking about. And I also want to point to a specific research guide. So on the sort of research fly-up menu on this first pane of our research dashboard, you can get to the whole list of research guides. And if you type in clerkship or clerk, it will pull up the one research guide that I'm talking about. Now, this is a research guide I wrote a couple of years ago to help a student who had actually scored interviews with a couple of judges and wanted to do some deep dive type of research on those specific individuals. However, this research guide still remains a good portal for direct links to some resources that are useful at various stages of your clerkship search process. This research guide is designed mostly from the point of view of searching for a specific judge or judges by name and doing a lot of in-depth research. But let's back up first and talk about our first question, which is, say I'm just starting out and looking for clerkship positions. Where should I start? This tab, the clerk's work, is the last tab on the research guide, but it might be a good place to start when you're at this part of the process. What I've collected here are some resources that help explain sort of the day-to-day work of clerking, as well as a little bit about sort of what to expect in clerkship interviews. I wanted to focus specifically on these two electronic books, The All-Inclusive Guide to Judicial Clerking and Behind the Bench, both of which are hosted on our West Academic Study Aids subscription. You'll see that both books are organized in a similar fashion, and some of the introductory chapters may be the part that's the most of interest to you when you're starting out on your clerkship journey. Now, in particular, in the All-Inclusive Guide, I focused on Chapter 1, Deciding Whether to Clerk. You may already know that you want to apply for clerkships, but have you thought about why and what you're looking for in a clerkship, right? What are your goals and objectives in clerking? What are your strengths? Are there particular legal topics that you're interested in exploring and learning more about? What do you hope to accomplish in a clerkship? Or what skills do you want to build and work on through clerking? So answering these questions and others like them can help you decide not only what courts and judges to consider in your clerkship search, but it should also strengthen your application. It'll give you things to talk about in your cover letter and your interview, and it will provide sort of guide points in your search for things to look out for about the judges that you're applying to that help make that clerkship fit in with your priorities for seeking a clerkship. So chapter 1 of this book, I thought, provided a nice short overview of the role and duties of clerks. It also has a list of the pros and cons of clerking. There's nothing particularly earth-shattering on this, probably considerations that you've already thought about. But beyond that, there's another chart that provides a tool for a self-assessment, right? This self-evaluation where you can think about these various aspects of your objectives, your strengths and skills, the kinds of work styles that work for you and that you enjoy, and other considerations about what the clerkship role can mean for you and your career and your professional development. Let me close that up and I'll go back to the research guide and the other book, Behind the Bench. And in this book, again, similar kinds of topics and organization. In particular, I thought that chapters 5 and 6, especially if you've done that sort of self-evaluation work and gone through that inventory, chapter 5, choosing a court that's best for you, and chapter 6, choosing a judge who's best for you. You can start to connect some of those elements of the self-assessment to thinking about what kinds of court structures and what kinds of judicial personalities might match up the best for your goals and your strengths and the things that you want to get out of clerkship. So one last resource that I just want to mention, and I'm just going to navigate to it from here, is one that you'll be getting to know if you do wind up deciding to pursue a federal clerkship. This is the OSCAR site. It's the online system for clerkship application and review, and it's the official site for the U.S. federal courts for applying for clerkships. And there's lots of information to explore here. I'd recommend just at the start that you kind of explore the materials that are here. And I will point out that on this tab about the federal judiciary, there are links to some career resources, including duties of federal law clerks, understanding the federal courts, and this peppy little video is this career for you. So this is definitely a site that if you wind up applying for federal clerkships, you'll get to know well this spring. Nothing to worry about right now, but it's just another place that you can find kind of the official word from the U.S. courts about federal clerkships. All right, so once you've done some of that preliminary self-assessment and thinking about what you're looking for, it's time to start looking at resources that will actually help you explore the courts and the judges, and we can even find some information about current law clerks. And so I'm back again at the research guide. for clerkship interviews, but again, some useful resources are already listed on the tabs here. My first stop is going to be at the Basic Prep tab, and I just want to pull us over into the Almanac of the Federal Judiciary. This is, as the title suggests, a basic source for exploring information about judges in the federal courts, including the district courts, bankruptcy courts, Court of Appeals, the circuits, even the Supreme Court justices, as well as, don't forget about these specialized federal courts. It's a pretty basic search functionality. Certainly, if you know the name of the judge that you're interested in finding out about, you can type that name in here. There is also an advanced search template, which allows you to search for things in certain fields, including things like educational history. That's going to include both undergraduate and law school and any other types of degrees that a judge might have, as well as private practice. So, for example, if you have a strong connection with a law firm and are interested in whether there are any federal judges who have come out of private practice from those firms, you could try searching with that term limited to the private practice field of the judge's profile. And just, taking a look at how that shows up, we can see lots of judges at different levels and different levels of seniority. And let's just jump into one of the biographies so that we can actually see what kinds of information appear here. Of course, appointment information, right? Which administration the judge was appointed under. So some of those fields that are searchable using the advanced search template, but also additional fields like clerkships. What the judge's own history was with having clerked. And what's often interesting here is the lawyer's evaluation. And for many judges, there will also be a field with publications. And for judges, especially those who've been on the bench for longer, there may be a field listing some noteworthy cases. And that can often be interesting information to review as you're really narrowing down to specific individual judges that you're interested in applying to. In the meantime, of course, we see here something else that would also be searchable, the educational background. And that, is often a search criterion that you would use. Now, if you're interested in searching for judges from Berkeley Law, as we saw from that example, it's a good idea to also search for the phrase Bolt Hall, because these judicial profiles are likely from an era when that was the name that was used. And you can limit that to the education field. You can also search for the phrase Bolt Hall just without limiting to that field if you're interested in judges who might have some other connection to Bolt Hall. While we're talking about the sort of alumni connection, I hope that you get a chance in the spring to sit down with a specialist at the Career Development Office. They certainly can help you narrow down and tailor your clerkship search process. And one of the big advantages of working with CDO on that is that they have sort of a network and files of information on the Berkeley Law Alumni Network, both judges and past and present clerks that can help you with that sort of networking aspect of things. But
This is, using the Almanac of the Federal Judiciary just to get a sense of sort of who's out there is definitely one way to go. The other thing that I'll mention, just looking at this this particular example, obviously one of the first the primary data points that's listed about a judge is the appointment information, which president, which administration appointed that judge. So it is not one of the criterion that you can search for under advanced search. So instead, if you are inclined to search for judges appointed by a specific president, I'd suggest you simply do it as a simple search, and the name Obama is only going to show up in sort of limited set of circumstances. So it kind of doesn't matter that you're not searching that term in a specific field. If you were searching for people appointed, say, by the younger President Bush, I just noticed one thing, which is that you should search for G period W period Bush for the younger President Bush, younger President Bush's appointees, and you can search for the phrase President Bush. So for both of those examples, I'm enclosing the phrase in quotes, and search that way, and that will sort out and not get you judges who themselves are named Bush, and it will get you people appointed by the president that you're interested in. Obviously, the appointees by President Bush Sr. most of them are at this point are senior judges. So let's put away that introduction to the Almanac of the Federal Judiciary and look at a tool for researching both federal and state court judges, as well as being able to research a little bit about clerks. This is a resource that's not on this research guide that focuses on the sort of from the perspective of already having a clerkship interview on the books. So I'm going to go back to the Law Library's homepage and look in our sort of research fly-up menu to bring up the databases list and show you a database called Leadership Connect. So if I just start typing that into the filter at the top of the databases list, it will bring up a link for Leadership Connect, which is a directory. It covers a lot of governmental organizations, as well as law firms and other private companies. But we're looking right now at the courts community here on this little stack on the left, stack of communities. Once I've selected courts, if I then go to the advanced search template, it will now show me filters including job title that have the job titles associated with court organizations. And so you see we can explore judges, and there's also a listing here for law clerks, which includes both career clerks and term law clerks. Generally, law school students are applying for term law clerkship positions. These are law clerks that have a specific defined term of appointment, whereas career law clerks do much of the same work or very similar work to term law clerks, but their appointments do not have a specific termination date or sort of a defined term for which they're appointed. You can search for both at once, or you might be interested in looking at just one of them. So selecting the judge title, we see that there's nearly 4,000 listings that we have here. You can filter that down by looking at particular geographies. You can look as we sort of did with the Almanac of the Federal Judiciary, you could look for educational background. And if I type in Berkeley here, one of the nice things is that it offers me different institutions, including University of California, Berkeley, generally a couple of the other graduate programs at UC Berkeley, but it gives me both Berkeley Law and Bolt Hall. So, and we can add as many of those as we want to as filters. So we have 38 who use the term Bolt Hall and an additional 3 who use the term Berkeley Law. So you'll see that these are judges both in the federal court system and various state court systems. Let's look at one of these profiles just to show you the kinds of information that are in the Leadership Connect directory. It's generally, more stripped down than the information that is in Almanac of the Federal Judiciary. And the career history, I'll just mention, tends to focus on the types of positions that are otherwise covered by Leadership Connect. So, these positions for which there are links in the judge's career history are organizations that Leadership Connect sort of tracks in this database. There are some positions that you're not necessarily going to be able to find out more, and you won't necessarily be able to find this judge based on their career history with ACLU of Northern California, because this is not an organization that is tracked in any parts of Leadership Connect. And so that's something to keep in mind, just comparing how you search and what collection of data you're searching in Almanac of the Federal Judiciary versus searching in Leadership Connect. One field that's of interest for the Leadership Connect directory entry for any judge is if under direct reports that judge lists law clerks, a law clerk. Judge Chen has both a term law clerk and a career law clerk. That is obviously potentially of interest for your judicial clerkship search. However, that's not a criterion that you can add to your search. Let me just go back to that list of Bolt Hall / Berkeley Law graduates who are judges in either state or federal courts. We can use the organization group filter over here on the left to look at just what state court judges, and we have 9 of them. Most of them are sort of regionally nearby. And, just jumping into one of them as an example, here only a judicial assistant is listed as a direct report. There may be other office staff. Usually law clerks I would expect to see as a direct report. So it seems like this judge, for whatever reason, does not maintain or list a law clerk. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is no law clerk who works directly in this judge's chambers. Leadership Connect is a directory. They've been around for quite a while, and they usually try to be very complete about every organization that they cover, and law clerks are definitely a topic that they cover. However, especially with term law clerks, because they are there for a limited term appointment, and that information is often not complete. I'll just show you a quick search. Let me clear that initial search and start over again, looking just at term law clerks. And let's say we're interested in term clerks in state courts. So we may find that there are other Iowa associate justices who do list law clerks. Evidently, there isn't one listed for that specific judge, Judge Brent Appel, who I was just looking at. But I just want to show you I'm just randomly selecting a profile, a directory entry. So, it has that link over to the judge that this individual is clerking for. And this one has reasonably complete educational information and actually shows quite a bit of career history. Law clerks do not always include such full information. So that means that if we do something like try to limit by education so that we get a list of Berkeley law grads who are currently clerking in state courts, we get no results. That does not necessarily mean that there are not currently out there somewhere in state court clerkships alums of Berkeley law. It simply means that Leadership Connect does not necessarily have that individual's information, or they may have they may not have the complete information for the individuals that they do have, and therefore, aren't able to determine that this person is an alum of Berkeley law. So I guess what I'm saying with all of that is you can kind of think of Leadership Connect with respect to term law clerks in particular as a good way to kind of see some clerks who are out there and find out about what kinds of background they have going into their clerkships, but it's not kind of the end of the line. It's not the end all and be all. So, worth exploring Leadership Connect for the information about clerks and particularly state court judges, if that's something you think you might be interested in focusing on. Let's go back to the clerkship interview research guide just for one more source that I'm going to point you to for exploring state court clerkships. And that's, it's a fairly basic thing, but if you are kind of at the point of just interested in researching state court systems, the National Center for State Courts has this little interactive map device for exploring courts. You can compare a bunch of different jurisdictions, or you can just look in detail at a particular jurisdiction. Let me pull up Vermont and Montana and New Mexico. And just show you, because you can compare side by side up to 6 individual states. The pictures get pretty small if you get beyond having 2 of these here. It'll show you a diagram of the courts that exist. These are not all courts that are going to have clerkships, but the little legend up here tells you the meaning of the boxes in these different diagrams, and it's mostly the IACs, the green boxes, the intermediate courts of appellate courts, and these, I don't know what color to call this, but the courts of last resort, the Supreme Courts, the ones at the tops of the diagrams that tend to be the ones that have clerkships. So, just knowing, sort of at the outset what the options are in these different state court systems and some basic information, whether the appellate structure includes appeal by right to the court of last resort, and whether where there is an intermediate court of appeal, whether that's an appeal by right, whether there's the death penalty is an option in these states, and some other very basic information about the jurisdiction. As it says at the bottom of the little basic overview, you can click on specific courts within the diagram. So, this little green box for the Court of Appeals in New Mexico. You can click on that and it will pull up a little bit more detail about the court structure of the Court of Appeals in New Mexico. You'll see here, for example, charts that list certain topics of civil litigation and criminal matters. It's not going to give you sort of caseload information, but it's telling you these various facts about the appellate structure, like whether the Court of Appeals for New Mexico has exclusive jurisdiction over these different categories of appeal, whether there is interlocutory appeal, as well as amounts in controversy and other potential information about the rules of the road. So that's going to tell you a little bit about what kinds of appeals go through this court, some of the types of work that will go across the desk of clerks in this court. In this portion of the video, we'll be looking at some resources to learn more about courts and jurisdictions from the standpoint of two possible starting points. So it may be that you're interested in a particular geographical area and you want to find out what courts are there and what types of cases those courts handle, whether they're in the federal or state court systems, and whether they're appellate, Supreme Court, or possibly even trial courts in those areas. And the other possible starting point is if you have a particular area of law, a practice area, or legal topic that you are particularly interested in pursuing, or that you have strengths in, and looking for jurisdictions that have a lot of cases in those areas. So again, we're looking at the Clerkship Interview Research Guide, and the Jurisdiction Information tab here offers some places to look both for federal courts and for state courts for kind of overview statistical information. And then we can look at some of the research tools for getting a slightly more detailed view of those factors. For the federal courts, the Administrative Office of the Courts has a web page where it hosts many years of reports about the federal judicial caseloads. When you click into a given year's reports, there will be this sort of high-level summary report on trends over time. And it, covers different areas and specialties, different levels and specialty courts of the federal court system. Up at the top, you can also go to a listing of the statistical tables for that year, and you'll find here the different courts that are covered, and more detailed tables that, for example, would allow you to compare different district courts based on the nature of suit, the general classification of what a civil filing is about, based on the cases filed during the year of that statistical collection. Similarly for criminal matters, and other statistical tables reported that would allow you to compare court by court within the federal system. For state courts, it can, there are often similar level of statistics collected either annually or, on other periodical basis. What I suggest in the research guide, the jurisdiction information tab here for statistics for state courts, is to go to the court's official website and kind of look for the office that does that statistical collection and reporting. And I just give an example here of one state court's systems reports. It's going to vary from court to court. For California, I do have direct links for a few places that you can find that type of information. As for doing your own research, Lexis Context is an interesting new tool. So let's go ahead and do a little demonstration on that. The link from the research guide for Lexis Context will bring you directly to that platform. But if you're anywhere else logged into Lexis, you should be able to pull down this little 9-dot grid menu and skip over to Context. At the end of the search bar, you can select to search for courts. And let me just start typing in the name of a court that I'm interested in. The type ahead finds that I'm looking for the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and it's going to bring me to this overview. The overview shows not just the contact information and the list of all the judges in this jurisdiction. It also shows me the kind of universe of documents that are available in Lexis's research platform that it's pulling from to do this analysis, and sort of it's pulling together data on linguistic analysis of many documents for this jurisdiction. But these two features on the overview page, the opinions by area of law and opinions per year sort of trend line for 20 years, can tell you a little bit about, give you a high-level overview about this jurisdiction's cases, the types of cases that are handled by this court. In the context platform, you'll always see these three tabs: Overview, Analytics, and Documents. For courts, if the Analytics tab usually is not going to be populated. That's really something that's geared towards outcome analysis for motions, and that's not a metric that really makes sense looking at a court overall. But it can be helpful for some jurisdictions to look in a slightly more detailed way at the documents that Context is presenting in the dashboard. Something a little bit more detailed than the overview. So when you pull up the documents, you'll see again that list of the pool, the universe of documents that Lexis is examining to do this context analysis. You can filter by the timeline. You see for this court, the timeline goes back quite far, but perhaps you want to look only at the last 10 years. So you can apply the date range filter. You'll see here on the filters that you still only get, kind of the top 5 topics. And they're quite broad topics as they were on that overview page. So that may not give you as much insight into the kinds of opinions that you might be working on as a clerk. However, you can do some other filtering to try to get a slightly more nuanced view. One thing that often works, at least for the federal courts, for which Lexis is usually going to have docket access, if you switch over under the filters to the content type for dockets, and this will pull up in just a moment, you can again set your timeline to just, perhaps I'll look at the past 5 years. Here we are. And because I'm looking at dockets, I can now have this additional filter by litigation area. And you'll see when I click on more that this gives me not only descending order by frequency, but much more detailed nature of suit litigation areas in the dockets. And that provides a more potentially a more nuanced view than the sort of larger overview buckets that are used under the practice area and topics filter. So if you wanted to, you could select one of these areas and kind of see what the cases are that from the past 5 years in the docket under intellectual property, for example, patent. I think what's more important here is just to kind of see the relative frequency of these different types of cases, some of which are, very general categories like other, civil, undefined, but some of which can be, quite specific. So that's an idea of some of the types of information that would be available for federal courts in Lexis context. Let's look at some state courts and say I'm looking at Vermont Supreme Court. It is interesting to note that Vermont Superior Court information is also available. Again, we're looking first at the overview page. Notice the much smaller universe of documents that are being presented in this dashboard. And based on that, perhaps a slightly more nuanced and in-depth understanding of the general topics of opinions as sorted by areas of law for, again, only the top 10. If we do look at the Documents tab for this court, we'll see again that dockets are not available. So we are relying heavily on the cases. We do have a collection of briefs, pleadings, and motions. This is a selective group. It's just those pleadings and motion papers, etc., that have been picked up by Lexis and are available in its research universe. But it may be of interest to see the practice areas and topics that are covered here. And again, timeline for this particular collection of documents, briefs, pleadings, and motions, you're going to see a shorter timeline, but you might want to focus that even a little further to kind of see a representative sampling of the types of briefs that you might expect to see if you were clerking in this court. Now, returning to my clerkship interview research guide, if you like the Lexis context kind of overview of particular courts, on another tab of the research guide, the one called Caseload and Dockets, I have a box here called Jurisdictional Caseload Information that provides some suggestions for using litigation analytics or docket searching on Bloomberg law to get some similar insights into federal courts, district and appellate courts, but only in the federal system because of the lack of analytics at those levels for state courts. So just as an example that I gave here for the Eastern District of Tennessee, I'll just show you kind of what that looks like if you followed the suggestions there. I'm in the litigation analytics part of Bloomberg law. I'm looking at courts. I looked up Tennessee and pulled up the appearances and case types tab. There are the top 5 case types shown here where I limited to the last 5 years. As I mentioned in the research guide, typically coverage is from about 2007 to the present. And you can select up to 3 additional and very specific case types to see sort of the numbers in which they appear compared to the other categories that are already here in the overview of the top case types. The Bloomberg analytics are the most useful are available for federal courts. Westlaw also offers some litigation analytics, and two of the advantages of using Westlaw would be that if you're interested in state courts, Westlaw may have coverage of different state courts than what is available on Lexis Context, so that can provide some additional coverage, and it also allows us to take sort of the other starting point. If you have a specific topic or area of law that you're interested in, to explore what jurisdictions may have the most cases in those areas. So let me switch over to a handout that we have from Westlaw that gives a few tips on that, and I'll show a demo of using litigation analytics on Westlaw. So one of Westlaw's more recent offerings is a platform on litigation analytics. And here we're looking at a tip sheet that they've provided that is focused on preparing for on-campus interviews. But certainly some of the steps that they suggest are applicable for a clerkship search as well. And specifically, they're kind of keyed to our 2 starting points. Is there a particular geography that you're interested in and you want to find out what kinds of litigation happen in those jurisdictions? Or you have a particular area of law that you're interested in and you want to find out what jurisdictions would see a lot of litigation in that area. You can click through from this tip sheet to get directly to the analytics area. There isn't actually a live example that it's going to link you into from that handout. But if you are anywhere logged into Westlaw right now, on their front page, the litigation analytics platform is linked from there, and you can get to this front page. As you can see, there are a variety of ways that you can look at their analytics. One of them is to look for certain courts. So let's follow the same examples that we tried before. And I start typing in 9th, and it already suggests to me the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. And I'm going to see some docket analytics up at the top based on some of the more frequent areas in which filings are occurring. We can also pull down the filter by case type, see an alphabetical listing that gives the frequency of those tags in their data. So in a way, looking at this docket analytics overview is sort of comparable to Lexis Context for looking at least for looking at a court like the 9th Circuit, for which Westlaw, like Lexis, has access to docket sheets. Let's try, one of my other examples was looking at Vermont. And notice here that the Supreme Court of Vermont is not one of the offerings. Several superior courts are available here as on the other services. So it's just a matter of whether the particular geography that you're interested in is, has coverage in one of the 3 Westlaw Bloomberg or Lexis. One of the other ways of looking at litigation analytics is to try that other sort of starting point is to think about the topics that you're interested in. So let's say I'm interested in civil rights litigation. As I start typing in that term, a number of terms, suggested sort of categories and tags are showing up, along with some numbers of the frequency in that they're seeing in the state dockets and the federal dockets that litigation analytics is drawing from. Let's take a look at this one about police conduct, qualified immunity, police conduct, civil rights. So in terms of the overview, you're going to get this sort of heat map showing some dockets where there are, more filings, and that's on the federal map of district courts. And here we see the state courts. So it's not a huge amount of data that they're pulling from. Obviously, these all 5 of these top state courts that are listed here are fairly active state court systems. So the fact that there are only 7 in California is probably not a reflection of the total overall number of state trial courts that in California that may have civil rights, but a reflection of much more in-depth coverage of trial court levels in New York than in California in the universe of documents that Westlaw's litigation analytics are looking at. So it's a very top-level view. It's you have to be, kind of think a bit about the availability of data from different jurisdictions, but it does give you a little bit of insight, perhaps, into where you might see cases, as these trial court matters come up through the state court systems. Where the appeals might be coming from for those state court systems. And, again, you can just start typing in keywords in the search bar when you're looking at litigation analytics. And then as the sort of type ahead suggestions come up, choose the case types and look at the suggested topics to see if any of these, have enough data that you might be interested in following up, finding out more about what jurisdictions see a lot of litigation in that area. So this example of labor with appeals as kind of the subtopic for that, again, the heat map, some numbers, and then other information about the kinds of subtopics that might be involved in those dockets. So a nice little overview, and it's nice that the state court systems are available in this analysis as well.
So I'll just take this opportunity to point out that if you want a little bit more detail about how to use Westlaw's litigation analytics platform, our Westlaw rep, Mark Fong, has produced a short video for us, it's about 15 minutes long, that walks through a couple of his suggestions for using litigation analytics, both to examine this question that we've been talking about, looking at either geographically, looking at certain jurisdictions and finding out what their caseloads and dockets look like through litigation analytics, or looking at a particular case type, a topical area of law that you have an interest in, and finding out what jurisdictions, including what state jurisdictions as well as federal jurisdictions, might have a lot of activity in that. So a link to Mark's video, a 15-minute intro he has on litigation analytics, is included in the handout that accompanies this video.
So now we've arrived at our last question, which is how you can do a little bit more of a deep dive on a particular judge that you're interested in applying to for a clerkship. I'm back at my clerkship interview research guide because, of course, it is organized around this approach of researching one or, perhaps a small handful of individuals by name. I do want to say at the outset of this section that I'd suggest you kind of, take it easy on yourself for now. At this stage, when you're, trying to pull together applications or thinking about where to send your applications, just keep in mind that this research guide, tries to present a lot of different ideas and suggestions and resources for doing really in-depth research on individual judges. And because of that, it's sort of, there's potentially a lot of rabbit holes that you could fall into here and, really get into the weeds. But what I'd like to do in this remaining portion of the video is just to do kind of a quick tour, kind of skipping lightly through this guide for the steps that you can take right now to research individual judges and perhaps start to think through and pull together the thoughts that you might have had by sort of assessing your reasons for wanting to clerk, what you think you would like to get out of the clerkship experience, and what strengths and experience you bring to that endeavor, and make look for the kinds of information about individual judges that will help you make those connections and give you something interesting and sort of very focused and individualized to talk about in your application package, whether that's via your cover letter or selecting the writing sample that you want to use. So, starting out with the basic prep tab of my clerkship interview research guide, I want to point again to the Almanac of the Federal Judiciary. I showed before using that to kind of look at various courts. You can just type in an individual judge's name, of course. If you are interested in a state court judge, that you want to investigate, we have some print sources. Two of them are listed here. The judicial profiles produced by the Daily Journal Corporation and the American Bench. Both of these are available in print, so when you get back to campus, you can set aside some time to go to the library and check those out. They have kind of somewhat similar or comparable profile type information as the Almanac, but they include state court judges. The Daily Journal is a California legal publication, so they cover judges in all of the jurisdictions, all of the courts that have jurisdiction in California, both federal and state court, but they're very useful for those state court profiles. And the American Bench covers as the title implies, nationwide. And so both of them will have the basic biographical educational background, as well as some additional information on organizations, professional associations that the judge has worked with. And in the case of the judicial profiles, there's often a collection. There will be a collection of comments from practitioners, sort of similar to some of the information that's in the profiles in the Almanac of the Federal Judiciary. I'm moving now to the caseload and docket tab that we looked at before in the research guide about jurisdictional information. On this tab, I also sort of suggest using a similar approach within Bloomberg law for examining individual judges. And this is something that's available for federal trial courts. Another part of this tab is one of those rabbit holes that I'm sort of suggesting that you don't necessarily need to do right now. This box about direct case searching. Certainly, if you are looking at a judge for whom the docket searching method that I suggest up here is not available, like a state court judge or an appellate court judge, a federal appellate court judge. This is certainly, one way by searching for cases directly in, one of our legal research platforms. You can find opinions just by the judge and start, filtering for recent results and get a sense of, some of the matters that judge has recently handled. But that's not necessarily a step that you need to do right now. So for some alternatives to the method suggested here using Bloomberg Law's dockets coverage, we can look at Lexis and Westlaw. And these resources, again, will be linked from the handout provided with this video. Lexis has put together this sort of tip sheet on judicial clerkship resources. It includes 2 videos. One of them is, quite short. It's a 3-minute video. The other one is slightly longer, a webinar. And the webinar is focused on judicial clerkship interview prep, but like my guide, my research guide on clerkship interviews, it also provides a lot of good tips for using some of the tools, including Lexis Context, which we looked at earlier in my video, and litigation analytics for investigating specific judges and or even comparing district court judges. Remember that Lexis Context includes some coverage of state courts, and so you may be able to use that to look up individual judges and kind of see that kind of dashboard view of a particular judge's experience and caseload and dockets. And there are also some short tips provided on a few of the other tools available in Lexis that may help you generally with your clerkship research and all the way through to the stage of prepping for a clerkship interview. Switching over to Westlaw, I'm back in the litigation analytics area that we looked at before in terms of case types. But as you'll see, you can also use this to look up individual judges. Now, when it comes to state court judges, the data that's available may be very limited. I start typing in the name of the judge, and the type ahead predictive text kind of shows me the specific name. And so you'll see, this is for somebody who has been Chief Justice in the California State Court since 2011 for quite a long time. But the data that's being pulled from for this analytical, sort of analytics overview is, fairly limited. You can take a look at the various tabs presented for any judge and see that the amount of the number of cases that's being analyzed is fairly limited, and that's just going to vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. What available data there are for the litigation analytics engine to work on. For federal court judges, of course, because Westlaw has access to the dockets, there's going to be a lot more data to be analyzed. So here we're looking at Judge Boudin from the First Circuit, and I just wanted to show you some of the kinds of overviews, ruling tendencies compared to the average for the district, the speed with which matters get resolved in this judge's chambers, and some topic areas. As we saw before with litigation analytics, looking at federal courts, the availability of dockets allows for some more nuanced sort of overview of the kinds of matters that are handled by the given judge or court or whatever it is that you're looking up here. And so here we see kind of a little bit more in detail the case types. So those are some additional ways of getting that similar kind of insight about individual caseloads and dockets for a judge that you are, have sort of narrowed down to. And you might see something in this kind of overview that helps you make a more of an individualized connection when you're thinking about putting together your writing sample or drafting your cover letter. So now returning to the Clerkship Interview Research Guide and our quick tour through the resources suggested here. I want to move on to the next tab, More News Sources. It's called More News Sources because hopefully you may have found some information via some of the basic prep resources that points you to recent to some prominent cases or other news that give some indications about the judge that you're investigating. More news sources really are some tools for doing more up-to-the-minute research on what your judge has been up to recently. And I'd almost suggest that that you skip that for now because it may be too tempting to talk about something that is, sort of currently underway, that you don't necessarily know how the judge feels, for example, about the press coverage that they're getting about that case. So it might not be something that you want to sort of open with in your application process. Certainly, if you feel the need to sort of, if you're not getting enough information from other sources about what the judge has been involved with, you might take a quick look to see if there have been recent either legal news or general newspaper stories about your judge. But it's not necessarily something that you're going to talk about in, starting to pull your application together. And of course, this research guide will be there, and that may be research you decide to do later on if and when you interview with that judge. The final stop that I want to take in the research guide is just to point to this region on the Background Sources tab about finding confirmation hearings. Remember that federal judges go through a confirmation hearing before Senate for their nomination, and there are folks in the state judiciaries who in the past have been nominated for federal judgeship, and if their nomination went to got as far as the stage of holding confirmation hearings, those can sometimes be interesting sources of information about a judge. Of course, it's going to give you some of that background information. Often it's going to include testimony or statements by the judicial candidate themselves about their judicial approach, their philosophy, and often there are ancillary materials that might give you some more insight into, the people who supported or otherwise, had evaluative statements about the candidate prior to their becoming a judge that may tell you something about the judge's demeanor, their reputation among the legal community. So that can just be a good collection of information. The steps suggested here are for ProQuest Congressional, a basic resource that we have in the law library for congressional materials. There are also some additional sources, especially useful for recent nomination and confirmation proceedings. So let me skip again out of the research guide to just show you quickly those resources, which are also listed on the handout that accompanies this video.
Okay, so through the magic of video, let's just jump right over to the Senate Committee on the Judiciary website, where they have a page that covers judicial nominations. At the front page, you just have kind of a reverse chronological listing of recent actions on judicial nominations in the Judiciary Committee. However, there's also this filter, which allows you to select a particular congressional session. If you're looking at somebody who was nominated or confirmed since 2009 or so, you may find the Judiciary Committee's records here. You can also simply search by name. So let's start by assuming that I'm interested in Lucy Coe. And, if I hadn't seen that first page, I wouldn't necessarily know that her middle name has been used in confirmation hearing materials. So let's say I'm just searching by last name. What this brings up is a list of not only these very recent proceedings, but also hearings on confirmation that were held at an earlier stage when she was previously nominated for the Ninth Circuit, as well as original proceedings from her nomination for the Northern District of California. Pulling down by clicking on one of these triangles on the most recent proceedings. Most of what we see here is really just this link to a presidential nominations file, this PN number that is going to pull up congress.gov. And at congress.gov, if there are documents including a report of the nominations hearing itself, that would tend to be found here. What we see, may be a very interesting timeline of what's been going on with this nomination recently. But for our purposes of doing kind of that background information search about Judge Coe, we don't see a link to reported printed hearings here. Now, it is possible that if we went back to our research guide and linked into ProQuest Congressional, that ProQuest Congressional sometimes has, for high-profile nominations, sometimes may have unofficial sources of transcriptions of hearings. For example, for a long time, for recent Supreme Court justice nominees, there were only these sort of other services, not the official GPO print, but that would definitely give you access to some of the things that were said by those judicial nominees. So if you really wanted to do a deep dive on this individual, that would be one way of doing that, even though the source is not available, the official print is not available on congress.gov yet. It's kind of up to you whether to put that work into it, at this stage, or whether you have enough information based on sort of your other sources. Going back to the judiciary site, the Judiciary Committee's site, so much for the sort of current round of her nominations. We can also look at a previous nomination process. It will have a different presidential nomination number because, of course, this was from a different Congress. One thing I'll point out here is that an additional source of information, especially that basic but very detailed background information, would be the candidates' answers to a committee questionnaire that covers both educational background, publications, some other sort of factual, objective information, awards and honors, and so forth, which might give you some additional insights. If we pull over again into congress.gov, we see again, sort of what happened with that nomination as it proceeded through the hearings, but unfortunately, no printed report. So that's where it's helpful that at least the committee questionnaire was included by the Senate Judiciary Committee's site. Finally, we can just pull up, the first nomination hearing that's covered here, and this was when this judge was first appointed to the district court, and it will again pull into a different record in congress.gov, and here we see that there is in fact a link to a hearing. So, of course, as suggested by all of this, another source for finding congressional nomination, particularly nomination hearing materials, is to search directly in congress.gov. And, one of the advantages here would be looking for nomination procedures that proceedings that were held before 2009, the kind of start date for judicial nominations. Let's just take a quick look at how to search in this site. So congress.gov, this one is already, at this screen, I've already pulled down to a specific one. We can back out to nominations, the nominations category in general. You can see that, it's by checking or unchecking on this filter list on the left, the type of action that we're looking for, which is just nominations. So again, following our method of just using the last name in case middle name or initial or some other variation is used. 111 results for the name Liu. I'm too lazy to look at all of that, so I'm going to look at some other filters, including the nomination type. I'm going to look only at the civilian nominations, and for the committee, I'm only going to look at Judiciary Committee hearings. Now, of course, it could be that the same judge that I have in mind was also nominated for other kinds of positions. Certainly, if it might be worth a look. It just kind of depends on the number of names involved. When I limit down to 6, I see only this nominee for DOJ and 3 nominations proceedings regarding Goodwin Liu. So from this point, it's somewhat similar to what we saw on the Senate's site in terms of seeing that presidential nomination numbering, which Congress, what year these hearings were held, and when you pull into any of these, you will see a list of what happened, and sometimes you will see a link to the document itself. Just to take a look at one of the hearing documents, what they'll show you here usually is the title page and sometimes the table of contents. This helps you know that there were several nominees presented during this set of hearings, but a proportion of this report is devoted to materials about now Justice Liu, including statements by the nominee himself, and also submissions from various groups that might have been speaking about, one or more of the nominees involved in this hearing. And finally, when we get up to the top, the back here, of course, there's a link to the PDF of the whole document, which you can download and use searching to find the references to the particular candidate that you're interested in, given that this was a hearing that covered several different individuals. So now let's take just a quick look at one more source for possibly researching this kind of background information, of getting information about the confirmation hearing for a judge. I'm navigating to the site afj.org. It is Alliance for Justice, and they have a specific project on tracking judicial nominations. And they have a bit of information about what they're doing with this, some statistics, and when we scroll down here, a number of documents relating to nominations, to recent nomination hearing proceedings. And you can take a look at the list of judicial nominees. It's a fairly short list, just 124. But if you are looking for something, a recent nominee, we were looking at Judge Lucy Koh earlier, so you could find the documents that they have about her. We see their letter in support of this nomination. This very brief overview with links to more detailed materials, including that letter of support and a background report from the earlier confirmation, the earlier nomination proceedings back in 2016, 2017. Depending on the judicial candidate, there may be a shorter or longer report, but the AFJ summary may just provide a nice overview of some of the important categories of cases. Now, with AFJ and with any other kind of information organized, brought together by a particular organization that you might find through doing, a general search engine search, definitely you should consider the source, right? So if the organization provides a page that tells you about the organization, about who's involved, and how the information was pulled together, definitely take a look at that and make sure that you understand the viewpoint and the perspectives that the organization is bringing to its collection of information on a judicial nominee. And in my view, I think at this stage, whether or not you are in agreement with all or any of the perspectives of a particular organization, it's always just good to understand, what information is out there, as long as when you're looking at the information they present about a judicial nominee, you've thought about the potential ideological, political, or other viewpoints that might be embedded in what they've chosen to present. It's just, more information for you to consider as you think about whether this particular judge might be a good fit for you to apply to and to work closely with as a clerk. Well, thanks for watching the video. I hope you picked up some useful tips and have some good ideas about where to start with your research on judicial clerkships. Remember that you can also always contact the Law Library. We're happy to meet with you individually so you can get some one-on-one help at any of these stages of your research. Best of luck to you on your application process.